Hello, my fellow peers. Today I'm going to ask you a few questions. Who hasn't seen some of those funny cat videos circulating the web? Found a new recipe online? Or researched a news story, especially with this COVID 19 stuff going on? These are just some examples of what we use the internet for. Today I'm going to talk about how the internet is a human right. The internet is used by almost all of us every single day, doing a variety of tasks such as keeping up with the news, researching school papers, keeping up with social media, and even business. The shelter in place order is a great example of how having access to the internet is a very important requirement to lead a semi-normal life right now. After researching this topic throughout the quarter, and as an avid user of the internet, I find myself believing this more and more. First, we will look at what constitutes a human right and what this means for the internet. Second, we will look at how one of the founders of the internet believes that technology, such as the internet, is an enabler of human rights and not a human right itself. Lastly, I will discuss with you why the internet is much more than an enabler of human rights, but a human right itself. First, we will look at what constitutes a human right and what this means for the internet. Jesse Tomalty takes a closer look at how there are often times where legal and natural rights are argued over as if they are human rights, and how important it is to know the roles and morals they operate on are actually very different. That the internet is not sufficiently fundamental to be a natural right due to its lack of morally relevant feature, and is therefore not a human right. To give her words weight, I will let you know Jessie Tomalty is an associate professor in philosophy at the University of Bergen, Norway, and that she teaches courses in ethics and political philosophy. The distinction between a natural right and a legal right was very strong when Jessie Tomalty stated, unlike natural rights, legal rights are social constructs, and their content is decided by people, not discovered. Natural rights either exist or they don't. This excerpt was pulled from a 2017 issue of Philosophy Now. Comparing human right to civil right, Kerf notes that the argument of the internet being a civil right is stronger due to the fact that they are conferred by law and are not inherently intrinsic, meaning belonging to itself or embedded within. Years later, Jessie Tomalty will say something along the same lines in volume 118 of Philosophy Now, as mentioned earlier in this speech. Conferred to the U.S. National Medal of Technology along with his colleague Vint Cerf is hailed as the father of the internet due to co-designing the protocols and architecture of the internet. Using UDHR, or the Human Declaration of Human Rights, as a standard measure of human rights, Christopher Conan, Wolfgang Hofkirchner, and Jose Maria Diaz-Nafria agree that human rights, as I understand them, are minimal or modest standards, while supporting Henry Shue in characterizing human rights as protections against standard threats to fundamental human interests. This allows us to focus human rights on those interests, choices, and capabilities that we have reason to believe are vulnerable to coercion or neglect by the state and other powerful actors. In this way, human rights are seen as grounded in our current experience and shaped by the needs of persons now. All of the characters I just mentioned have extensive backgrounds in their fields that I feel qualify them as credible sources. Christopher Conan is head of a research group at a university in Germany that studies life, innovation, health, and technology. He has more than 10 completed projects that relate to ethics and technology and is currently working on 5 more. Pulled from the website Transform Europe, Wolfgang Hofkirchner is an associate professor for technology assessment at the Vienna University of Technology in Austria. His fields of interest are complexity thinking, information sciences, and ICTs in society. He has authored more than 200 publications. He coordinates with the Bertalanffy Center for the Study of System Science and the former president of the International Society for Information Studies. Of Jose Maria Diaz-Nafria's long list of credentials, the ones I will tell you about include that he is on the board of the International Center for Information Ethics, is vice president of communications of the International Society for Information Studies, and is on the board of directors of the Science of Information Institute. And the last credentials I will list belong to Henry Shue, who the three previously mentioned experts appear to support in his distinction of human rights. Henry Shue is a senior research fellow at the Center for International Studies of the Department of Politics and International Relations, is a professor emeritus of Politics and International Relations, and is a senior research fellow emeritus at Merton, and is best known for his book, Basic Rights. All of the credentials I've listed is to help show that all these people are qualified to categorize internet as a human right or not. Between all these distinctions of human, civil, legal, and natural rights, it can be hard to determine which category internet access as a human right falls into. Each article that I have found argues a slightly different view. In this next section, I will look at whether or not the enabling ability of the internet makes it a human right. Second, we will look at how one of the founders of the internet believes that technology such as the internet is an enabler of human rights and not a human right itself. Vinton G. Cerf, one of the founders of the internet, explains that technology is an enabler of rights, not a right itself, in a New York Times article from January 2012. A good comparison to Cerf's claim is as follows. Many people use various forms of technology to make a living. An example, a pen. Does this mean that having a pen should be a human right? No. Cerf defines human rights, giving examples such as freedom of conscience and freedom from torture as something that humans need to lead healthy, meaningful lives, and does not think that the internet belongs in this category. Human rights are needs such as freedom of speech and freedom of access to information, and those are not necessarily bound to any particular technology at any particular time. Cerf reiterates, emphasizing how technology is not a basic need. What constitutes a human right is argued again by Stephen B. Wicker and Stephanie M. Santoso in Viewpoints 2013 when they state, human rights are a bundle that includes both an abstract expression of the right and some means for enabling that right, directly opposing Cerf's view that an enabler does not make a human right. An example, is freedom of press truly free if governments can limit the access to printing technology? No. Stephen B. Wicker is a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Cornell University and a member of the graduate fields of computer science, information science, and applied mathematics. Stephanie M. Santoso has a doctorate in philosophy from Cornell University, MS from Syracuse University, and a BS from the University of Virginia. She is director of the Makers Initiative and has worked as a first senior advisor with the White House on this issue from 2014 to 2016. After reading through all these articles and assessing both sides of the argument, I was honestly about to change my decision on whether I thought access to the internet is a human right. What pushed me back onto the side of my original gut decision was something that Stephen B. Wicker and Stephanie M. Santoso wrote when they clarified why the internet was not just an enabler of a right, but a right itself. Next up, I will explain why the internet is much more than just an enabler of human right, but a human right itself. Comparing the modes in which we communicate, Wicker and Santoso state, we classify broadcasting, advertising, and related attempts by large corporations to reach individuals as vertical communication, while that from individuals to other individuals is termed horizontal communication. The fact that the internet is a horizontal communication differentiates it from the standard forms of communications, such as vertical communication, in which most forms of information is gathered. For example, television, newspapers, public speeches, etc. All forms of vertical communication do not allow the audience to participate or respond, usually, or at least limited. Horizontal communication, chat rooms, public forums, and more allows the audience to question and comment on the issues being addressed, which significantly reduces the chances of information being censored or just being propaganda. The internet combines vertical communication with horizontal communication on a platform that any human is capable of accessing, if, there's internet access. There are many different forms of communication outlets, such as recordings, phone calls, meetings, and debates, articles, and each is being used as primary form of communication and freedom of expression. What makes the internet move past being an enabler and pushes it into the category of a human right is the sheer magnitude in which it outstrips any other previous mode of communication. In IRI, International Review of Information Ethics, Conan, Hofkirchner, and Nafria give an apt comparison of the internet to the printing press when they say, "The internet now is akin to the printing press in the period when the freedom to publish and distribute printed works began to be seen as a right." They back up this statement by listing previous forms of communication that are fading from prominent circulation or being moved to a newer, easier accessible format, the internet. By facilitating a wide range of communication activities in the form of person-to-person communication and collective communication, the internet falls under the protection of the human right to expression and to information, the right to assembly, and the right to culture. As a counter to Vinton G. Cerf's claim, the best way to characterize human rights is to identify the outcomes that we are trying to ensure. These include critical freedoms like freedom of speech and freedom of access to information, and those are not necessarily bound to any particular technology at any particular time. I present a statement by Christopher Conan, Wolfgang Hofkirchner, and Jose Maria Diaz Nafria. There are fewer newspapers, fewer people write letters, more government functions are online, there are fewer print sources providing information that people need. If freedom of the press is a human right, then so is freedom of the internet, meaning the right to post and access content online without government interference. I have no doubt that if the internet was invented in the time when the freedom to publish and distribute printed works began to be seen as a right, that the sheer utility would incite those to argue it as a fundamental right as well. Today, we looked at the internet as a human right, some of the arguments against its inclusion, and why it ultimately decided that it was a human right. I would like to bring this speech to an end by going over the main points I discussed with you previously. First, we looked at what constitutes a human right and what this means for the internet. Second, we looked at how one of the founders of the internet believes that technology such as the internet is an enabler of human rights and not a human right itself. Lastly, I discussed with you how the internet is much more than an enabler of human rights, but a human right itself. This speech led you down all the paths that I traveled when I was ascertaining if the ability to watch those funny cat videos, discover new recipes, research in news articles, or gaining critical access to the information pertaining to COVID-19 via the internet is a human right or not. My conclusion that the internet should be a basic human right My conclusion was that the internet should be a basic human right. What's yours?